Okay, thank you. Well, I will declare a quorum for the Ada County Highway District Commissioners, and I'd like to thank you all for being here. We will begin, because this is a commission meeting, albeit a special commission meeting, with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Director Wong, would you please lead us?
Thank you. If you'd all stand, please, and follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned, we do have a quorum. Do we have a quorum from the County Commission?
Yes, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Do you need to do anything special because of that?
No, we've noticed it.
Okay. How about from any of the cities? Is there a quorum of any city council? It does not look like it to me. So anyway, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ada County Highway District Zoom style. We are here today to discuss two pieces of legislation brought this session by ACHD. Discussion will center around the content and history of these two pieces, Senate Bills 1106 and 1107. Most of you have been sent a summary of Bill 1106 and should understand most of what is going to be discussed. Our staff has prepared, as part of that summary, just what this bill is and what it is not. And to tell you the truth, to me it reads more like a white paper, and it's very complete, and I hope you concur. As you are likely aware, these bills have been worked and reworked to address the voiced concerns of our municipal partners. Please feel free to ask questions either in the chat box, or if you prefer, let Stacy know that you wish to speak, and I will call on you at the end of the presentation. Unless the Ada County Commissioners or the ACHD Commissioners wish to make comments, in which case, please feel free to interrupt and the presentation and ask those questions as we normally do, or you normally do in your regular commission meetings. We will not be taking public testimony. So if some of you who wish to be heard or addressed, and you're with your city council or mayor or others who would be involved in this, please make known your questions to them and they will ask it. We will now turn the podium over to our director, Bruce Wong, and together with our general counsel, Steve Price, we will explain these two bills and answer your questions. And as you know, these bills are set to be heard tomorrow in the Senate. Bruce?
Thank you, Mr. President, commissioners, and welcome to our friends, the Ada County Commissioners, and all of their viewers. Director Wong has had to leave for temporary to take a phone call, an important phone call. Today I've been asked to provide a presentation on both Senate Bill 1106 and 1107. Kind of as a background, the process on how ACHD develops legislation comes from a way to find cost savings and improve efficiencies in our operations by changing different areas of law. And that starts with, after each legislative year, our staff send recommendations to our executive team or to the director. Then there are, from that, those suggestions, those are investigated and reviewed. And if they're accepted, then those are drafted and we present those topics to our commission. These two bills were presented to our commission last fall, and we were directed as staff to go forward with including those in our 2021 legislative agenda. So let's get right into it. Here is, well, let me back up a little bit. When we introduced Senate Bill 1106, of course, we just drafted it kind of thinking of what our intentions were. We really didn't provide a lot of thought. We had what wording worked for us. We got a lot of feedback. We got feedback from the Boise Chamber, from the city of Boise, and some feedback from the Idaho chapter of the American Planning Association. And we also received some feedback from legislators. And as a result of that, in each instance that we've been communicated with, any concerns that we had has resulted in changes to the language in this bill. I can't think of a topic that has not been addressed. So this version that I have up here that has the red line, this is the version that we will present to the Senate Local Government Committee tomorrow at 3 p.m. In that presentation, we'll be requesting the committee to send this to the 14th order to amend Senate Bill 1106 so it's consistent with the red line changes that are before you. I've kind of broken it down just so you can read it.
I'm sorry, Steve, this is Commissioner Kenyon. I just have a quick, you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just a quick question. So what was Boise City's concern and what changes were made after your discussions with the City of Boise?
The City of Boise believed that they were concerned about two things. One was that it didn't require the local highway district to consult with local agencies, and so that change was made. The chamber were concerned.
Excuse me, Steve. So that change was made by you adding the word collaborate?
No. Actually, we added the word "and local highway jurisdiction shall consult." That was not in the original language.
Okay, thank you.
The word "collaborate" was recommended by the Boise Chamber. They wanted something stronger than "consult." And we battered around a couple of words, and I believe that Matt Erperling thought that "collaborate" was a better word. The other issue was that there was no definition of essential facilities. And so they requested that we include a definition, and that's resulted in the definition that's in this draft. One is they wanted...
Mr. Chair? Commissioner Goldthorpe, are you chairing this meeting?
Yes, I am.
Hi, I was wondering if, given that Boise's position is being expressed, if Kathy Griesmeyer actually could share the feedback provided and our concerns with the changes or reaction to them?
Yes, of course.
Great. Kathy Griesmeyer is our Government Affairs Director and has provided correspondence regarding the topics that Commissioner Kendra Kenyon just asked about, but then also some follow-up to the changes that were made. Kathy, I believe, is on here. I can share that.
Thank you, Mayor and Chair Goldthorpe and ACHD Commissioners, County Commissioners and Mayors. This is Kathy Griesmeyer. As Mayor McQueen mentioned, I'm the Government Affairs Director for the city. And just to build on the comments that we shared with ACHD, with Stephen and with their lobbying team here, we did provide initial feedback stating that we had concerns with the legislation. We were provided the updated draft and then responded recognizing that there was an attempt to provide some additional context to the language, but that ultimately we felt the language was still broad regarding necessary to support statutory responsibilities, and that ultimately the legislation's intent was to in our view, remove us from decisions around what's happening on and around our streets. And so provided written feedback to that point on the 26th of February, and then also last week as we were preparing to potentially speak to these issues during a committee hearing last week as well. So appreciate that the commission has provided an opportunity to provide feedback, but still felt ultimately that this was not something that we were going to be able to get on board either to a neutral position or to support. So we remain opposed.
Thank you.
And Kathy's recited the city's position. I was simply providing some of the discussions that we've had, and Commissioner Kenyon asked me the changes were made and who requested those. I'll go on. Another change was requested that they wanted to make sure that essential facilities didn't include any third-party property. And so we added the word owned and operated by ITD or local highway jurisdiction. And also that it couldn't be used to do facilities on new property. And so we included the word existing property, owned and operated. Those requests were made by, I believe, the city of Boise, as well as a couple of legislators recognized that they thought that that would be a helpful amendment. So what does Senate Bill 1106 accomplish? It expands the exemption to include...
Steve, President Goldthorpe,
Yes.
could we go back one slide? I would like to see the definitions of the essential facilities,
There you go.
if that is what this slide is. Okay, thank you. It doesn't, is that, Mr. Price, is that the definition of essential facilities? Because it seems pretty broad.
Well, this is the definition that we've come up with, and it really is the facility has to be existing, has to be on property owned and operated by the highway jurisdiction, and it has to be necessary to support the agent's responsibilities complying with state and federal law. So whenever there is a mandate that comes, we're required to comply with that law. And that's the intent that started this whole need. But if you have suggestions...
A question, Mr. Price, and that is that when we say existing, that means we can't make future plans based on reliance on this, because if we are going to purchase some property and do something, that is not considered as existing, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes.
this is John Evans. As far as how we got here, the history, maybe we could step back just a little bit. I'd like to know what role the salt shed at the Adams Street project had to do with the preparation of this piece of legislation. I wanted to give Mr. Price an opportunity to comment, because it's my understanding that he indicated in a Zoom meeting that the Garden City Salt Shed was the sole reason for this 1106 effort.
Mr. President, Mayor Evans, I don't recall that. It most certainly was the genesis of the discussion and the request by staff to look at another solution. For any more history, I think the director would have more insight. But I think that this bill is, after talking with ITD and other local highway jurisdictions, they see this as generally a good thing, because they've experienced frustrations with land use agencies when they're required to comply with federal law. It isn't the salt shed, most certainly isn't the first instance that the highway district has had difficulty in getting approvals for essential facilities at the Adams site. But admittedly, the salt shed most certainly would cause the conversation and the review to examine the need for a change.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Alexis. So, Mr. Price, I'm just curious. You're mentioning obviously the federal law that, you know, ACHD that we have to comply with. But I'm really curious when that butts up against federal law around where we can put salt sheds and how other federal laws that cities have to abide by. That makes things pretty complicated. So, how does that work?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pickering, I'm not aware of any federal law that tells us where we can put a salt shed. So can you clarify that point?
I think just generally speaking around, insurance or, other policies that cities have to abide by in terms of protecting the quality of life and safety of their constituents. So it just seems like we're putting ourselves above any policies that the cities might enact to protect their quality of life, and saying that our essential facilities are more important than their essential facilities.
Well, most certainly we have to comply with federal law in the expansion of any of our facilities. Most of those are regulatory. It applies to all different areas, the MPDS, those type of things. But that's the question. That was the question that the commission debated last fall. Most certainly the coordination and collaboration with the local government in reviewing the site plans, those discussions would identify those issues and try and find solutions to those.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Thank you. Couple of questions. I think to pick up on Commissioner Pickering's question, we've got a floodplain ordinance requirement in Garden City that is paramount to being able to offer federal flood insurance. And the flood insurance program requires an approved floodplain ordinance. And I think the issue that references back to flood insurance is that floodplain ordinance and our ability to enforce it is paramount to or has a direct nexus to flood insurance rates. And that's a pretty significant issue for us because 74% of our city is in the floodplain. So one of the concerns we have is, and this again gets back to the salt shed issue. The salt shed was placed there because of a DEQ issue that they wanted the highway district to comply with. There was a temporary permit issued to deal with that, but to deal with that permanently puts us in conflict with our own floodplain ordinance. So that's kind of where the rubber's meeting the road, and that's the genesis of my question if the salt shed started this, because we're in the middle of pending litigation on this very issue, and the timing of this piece of legislation could be construed to circumvent that legal action that's pending. So, we don't have confidence, frankly, my legal advisors, that Idaho Code 46-1023 necessarily takes care of us. And we've run that up the chain with a number of attorneys. It's not very clear. Mr. Price has represented to me that that would protect the city's floodplain ordinance. If that were the case, certainly if we'd had an opportunity to chime on this before this bill was introduced, by the way, we had no notice. But if we had that notice, we would have been able to request that specific language be placed in the bill to alleviate any ambiguity about whether or not 46-1023 would protect the city's flood insurance program.
Mr. President, Mayor Evans, is that a question, or would you like me to address the statement?
Well, thank you. It was a statement. A little background, I guess, from our perspective. The question is, will 1106 prevent the removal of the salt shed?
Steve, you might want to give a little history on the commission's deliberations about moving the salt shed.
I'm just trying to catch up with where I got the floodplain.
If I got you out of order, my apologies. Maybe you were getting to that. But
No, I was going to get to it, but no worries. We're here to accommodate the conversation. There is, Mayor Evans, there is the relevant section. When you look at the Local Land Use Planning Act, the Local Land Use Planning Act has nothing to do with floodplain. It is done by a separate law, and most certainly that I believe that that this legislation won't impact the requirement for meeting floodplain management ordinance. But even then, it's this, I mean, here the entity that has the floodplain ordinance can enjoin the action if it doesn't conform with the provisions of the Title 46, Chapter 10. But if, and down and below in Section 2, it says a local allows a development in the floodplain below the flood protection elevation without adequate flood proofing, the development shall not be, in the event of a disaster emergency involving flooding in the floodplain, be eligible to receive matching funds from the state for any federal disaster assistance program which may be available as a result of said flooding in the floodplain. So it most certainly contemplates developments in the floodplain. It simply says that they're not going to be eligible for any federal disaster assistance. But any floodplain issue has nothing to do with the Local Land Use Planning Act. It has everything to do with Title 6, Chapter 10. In fact, Mayor Evans, I went through the entire Local Land Use Planning Act and looked for flooding, and it is not an issue that's regulated. So any separate ordinance is not.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for you, Mr. Chairman. Goldthorpe?
Yes.
Well, a couple of questions. First, all of our people are getting kicked off the Zoom. Are we having a problem somewhere with the Zoom issue?
Didn't think so. I pretty much saw
Nothing.
The same number of people there that have always been there since the beginning.
Well, our people are getting removed. I mean, Commissioner Davidson was just removed. Steve Rutherford was just removed, and so was some of our staff in planning and zoning. So I would ask you to at least take a look at that and see if we can get them back on. But I have another question for you, Mr. Chairman, and for Mr. Price, and that is, Mr. Price just indicated that this issue had little or nothing to do with that salt shack, and the representation that I got from the chairman of the local government and tax committee was that it had everything to do with that salt shack. I'd like to have some clarification. Does this issue have anything to do with the salt shack or not?
I think I can clarify it for you. Just as Steve said, it had everything to do with the genesis of this action.
Okay, and I have another question for you. With an issue as major as this that deals with the Land Use Planning Act throughout the entire state of Idaho, we're sitting here as a county commission. We had no knowledge of this at all. I don't think any of the cities had any knowledge. Was there a reason why we were left out of the discussion, why this is the very first meeting we're having to discuss this issue?
I'll let Steve or Director Wong answer that, because as has been mentioned already, we discussed this very thoroughly last fall.
Well, you may have discussed it very thoroughly last fall, but I guarantee you if we had an issue dealing with the highway district that we were intending to present, we would talk to you first before we ever presented it. And I'm sure the cities would have the same notion. Am I not correct?
I think I heard you the first time, Commissioner Beck.
Mr. President, Commissioner Beck, typically we hand the legislation to our lobbyist. Our lobbyist, once the bill is RS, they then contact representatives in the State House and let them know that the legislation, we typically don't daylight that until it's actually been printed as an RS. If there was any other daylighting of the issue, would have happened within the commissioners as well as the director. But that is the process in which we daylight legislation. This bill has been printed, I think, over 5 weeks ago. It's been on the docket. We have held on to it. Anybody that's talked to us about it, we have responded. We most certainly have reached out. We've had conversations with a lot of people. Ada County has representatives down at the State House. We've never received any communication from the Association of Counties or the Association of Idaho Cities until recently. And once recently, we took every effort to change the hearing date to allow for there to be additional input into the legislation.
Mr. President?
Did you know the Idaho Association of Counties has already voted to oppose this legislation?
I'm not aware of that.
As have the cities.
As have the cities, as have the Planning Association. Who supports this besides the Highway District?
I haven't talked to our lobbyists. I know that highway districts as well as I believe ITD is.
If somebody else got a question or comment?
Mr. President, it's Alexis. Just a quick comment. Commissioner Beck, I thank you for your comments. I just want to make one statement here. So just so everybody knows, I mean, I'm a newer commissioner, just got in January, and I wasn't meaningfully included in these conversations either. And so to Mr. Price's comment about this is the process, I'm totally amenable to getting that feedback from this conversation to say, how can we improve the process moving forward? I can only imagine how frustrating this is to have this conversation as the wheels are already in motion. So thank you for your feedback, and looking forward to the rest of this meeting.
Mr. President, I believe that Director Wong conducted some outreach with the bill, as well as we had a legislative summit with Ada County representatives. The legislation was discussed, all of it, our entire legislative agenda. I'm most certainly willing to let the director respond, but as well as that these issues were daylighted with the new commissioners in early January. So this hasn't happened.
Mr. President, I just have to say something. There's a difference between daylighting a particular idea and concept as a challenge, and then actually not knowing fully what the actual bill and language looks like, and the potential downstream consequences of that bill. I was very intentional in saying I wasn't meaningfully communicated with about this bill and those downstream consequences and how they affect our land use partners.
Thank you.
Mr. President, would you like me to go on with the presentation?
I certainly would.
So what Senate Bill 1106 accomplishes, it expands the exemption to include essential facilities determined by the ITD Board and Local Highway Jurisdiction Board, limits what may be considered an essential facility to transportation system, existing facilities owned and operated by the ITD Department and Local Highway Jurisdiction. They have to be essential and necessary to comply with state and federal law. It also expands the requirement the Idaho Transportation consult with local agencies regarding their plans to also include local highway jurisdictions. That language is not in the bill. Well, it is not in the current law. So now local highway jurisdictions have to consult with land use agencies regarding their plans. The only references, in fact, in the Local Land Use Planning Act, it requires the land use agency to coordinate the development of their comprehensive plan with transportation agencies. It requires local land use planning agencies to coordinate with the development of new schools. This puts the burden of consulting on the highway districts to work with local agencies. Again, it expands consulting with the land use planning agency to collaborating with the agency. LUPA does not apply to ITD or local highway jurisdictions and transportation systems. What does Senate Bill 1106 not do? It doesn't remove the requirement that Idaho Transportation consult with the land use agencies. Again, it requires the local agency to consult with the land use agency. It doesn't allow ITD or local highway jurisdiction to exceed its statutory authority. We can't put a gravel pit in the middle of a road. Excludes, it can only be for necessary and essential operations to comply with state and federal law. Excludes from the exemption facilities that ITD or local highway district may own and operate which are not essential and necessary in its efforts to comply with state and federal law. It excludes from the exemption facilities that ITD or local highway jurisdictions do not own and operate. It excludes, here again, that is limited to existing property. It does not have any effect on compliance with the floodplain regulations, those governed by Title 46, Chapter 10. It does not remove any right for public participation. The ability of the public to be involved is not changed from the status quo. The Senate Bill 1106 comports with current law. The Dillon Rule makes municipalities, they can only exercise those powers that are granted to them by the legislature, the state constitution. ITD and local highway jurisdictions have authority by statute. It's limited in nature, but it's also exclusive. The power and jurisdiction of a local highway district is inclusive, which means you can't have concurrent jurisdiction over the public rights of way. A municipality, on the other hand, may exercise police powers broadly, but not in such a manner as to conflict with a separate and specific grant of power under Idaho's general laws. Thus, while a municipality can pass an ordinance under LUPA, which is general applicability, it cannot contravene the grant of exclusive authority under state law to ITD or local highway jurisdictions concerning the highways and rights of way. It does not expand ITD or local highways statutory responsibility. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, President Goldthorpe?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Kendra. I'd like Jason Bowl, I believe, our development staff, deputy director is on, and he also represents the Planning Association. If you could weigh in, Jason.
Commissioner Kendra, Kenyon, I couldn't understand what you just said.
Go ahead.
So, Commissioner Goldthorpe, this is Jason Bowl, I represent the Untitled Chapter of the American Planning Association. I believe Commissioner Kenyon was asking for my input. I know one of the things that has been the biggest concern, or one of the big concerns for the Planning Association, is public input. And I know Mr. Price said that the status quo is still in place, but we fail to see how that applies when we're talking rezone application or conditional use application. There are public hearings that are required for the local communities to hold to gather public input. Collaboration and cooperation doesn't necessarily mean public input. It doesn't mean the opportunity for the public to weigh in to what is going to happen on a property owned by the highway district or ITD.
Are you saying that there was a responsibility legally for us to take this to the public and have hearings?
No, what I'm saying is currently under the Local Land Use Planning Act, if the highway district is looking to expand their facility, they are required to make application through the local community.
What do you mean by community?
The city or the county.
Okay, and we are doing what here in that regard? Nothing.
No, so Commissioner Goldthorpe, what I'm saying is if this legislation passes, it removes that requirement for conditional use permits, rezone applications, and meeting the use standards adopted by local communities.
For existing facilities only, it removes the opportunity for time to be wasted for people who know nothing about the process or the legality of it to say no, and then for us to have to start litigation. That's what it does.
Mr. President, if I can, and I understand Mr. Bull's question.
Okay.
Well, that was one reason, by the way, to keep it with existing property that's owned, because that property is likely to be already zoned in a particular fashion to accept that type of facility. It's already, the location of that business operation transportation system has already been vetted with the adjacent public. But I'll also remind you that the applicability of 67-6528 says that all of the agencies have to comply with LUPA unless otherwise provided by law. There are lots of instances that other areas where LUPA doesn't apply, and it's also been extended for parking lots, also parking garages. This is not the first time or the first place that there's been an exemption granted based upon need.
So, and if I can, Mr. Price, I guess we differ in opinion when we're talking specific uses and you're talking exempting complete agencies. And I know you've identified the existing property, but it seems that is not, it doesn't say property currently owned. It says existing property. And so I think there could be some clarity added to that, to the definition as far as what is existing property. Does that mean it is currently owned, or does that mean it's just currently existing?
Well,
so that is a concern.
So it does say existing property owned and operated. That doesn't mean in the future.
So, and I guess if it is in fact an existing facility on existing property, the Local Land Use Planning Act protects non-conforming and existing uses. I guess I fail to understand why it needs to be exempted if there already are protections in the Local Land Use Planning Act for what it is you're looking to do.
Steve?
Well, I don't think those protections address this instance. In fact, I'm sure they don't. And most certainly, it's existing property that exists prior to the need for an existing facility.
Thank you. Is there another comment or question from someone else?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Mr. President, Bill Neri, Meridian City Attorney. I guess the concern I still have is there's no date here. So when it says existing, are you implying that everyone's going to know that as of July 1, 2021, anything that comes later is not applicable to this ordinance? Because it doesn't say that. I don't know what existing is supposed to mean except for property you already own.
Well,
So I don't think it's that clear. And secondarily, you still have collaborate, I think as the last gentleman said, is helpful, but it doesn't mean we have to agree. You still get to decide what's essential. And ultimately, I don't know what that's going to be either. And so for the long-term impact to local land use can be significant. And I think, as Mayor Evans stated earlier, some opportunity and time to collaborate on this ordinance or this statute before it went to the legislature would have been nice, but we had no notice at all. So I don't think this says what you're saying it says, or at least to the clarity that I think is necessary to protect the interests of the city and the local land use.
Well, Mr. Neri, if we put a date after existing, that would probably succeed in confusing a lot of other parts of the act.
I would agree, Mr. President. I think it would, but it's being portrayed as if that's what that means, and I don't know that that's what that means. 5 years from now, and the highway district wants to put something on existing property you own in 5 years, but didn't own it today, no one is going to know that. They're going to say, you own this, you therefore can do this without any other approval. I don't think that gets the same level of comfort that it's being touted when I don't think it says that.
Well,
Mr. President, Mr. Neri, do you have any proposed language that you think would clarify that?
I don't know why you need this language at all. I don't know why you need this change. I haven't heard a problem that you cannot resolve through discussion with the way the statute is today. So I'm not certain why there's a necessity to even make this.
Okay, so you don't have any proposed language.
No, I'm sorry. Okay. You brought it up. I'm responding to what you've stated.
No, but the language that was inserted was inserted by Senator Lakey. That was at his request.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Thanks, it's Laura McLean. And I think what you're hearing is resounding concern related to this bill, from a very basic perspective. I appreciate that Bill for Meridian was just on there, and our attorney also, given the presentation, would just like to share the feedback and some of the, I believe, history of the correspondence related to this and our concerns about what this means. And from there, I think I can see Kathy. I can't see our attorney, so I'll just ask if he can jump on.
I'm on, Madam Mayor.
Oh, hey there. Sorry, I had to scroll through the pictures.
Mr. President, Commissioners all, and Mayors, James Smith, Deputy City Attorney for City of Boise City. We appreciate that much of the discussion here has focused on the idea of exempting the so-called essential facilities. And certainly we agree with a lot of those legal points and concerns that are being raised. Another issue here, and this is where the unintended consequences abound in this bill, is the opening edit, adding the state and local transportation systems to where it says plans and ordinances shall not apply. Now, the proposal is to say, rather than just the statewide importance, that it will not apply to state and local transportation systems. And to us, that almost opens up an even larger issue or even larger question of definition. That what is a transportation system? Does it include everything in the right-of-way? And our problem there is what about private uses in the right-of-way? What about facilities in the right-of-way that ACHD may not own, may not operate, may not have any need for, or indeed any use for under its statutory authority and role as a transportation jurisdiction? And the case in point is a billboard that the Lamar Advertising Company erected at State Street and Willow in violation of the city's development code and which, so we were told, ACHD would countenance, and not only that, but has maintained that the city's development code would not apply. Yet here we see that that the bill is trying to say that, or at least that's our understanding, that this bill is trying to say that transportation systems, local systems, are now exempt from LUPA. And so it's hard to interpret that as anything but that the right-of-way and everything in it is exempt. And so we have trouble meeting that too, since we think it's got a lot of consequences for that, and wireless facilities roll out, other things that cities will have a great interest in regulating and making sure that their citizens are taken care of.
Mr. President, if I can respond. Hi, James, how are you? We don't, I think you're misinterpreting that phrase, state systems. Already, the land use agencies don't have any authority within the public right-of-way. I'm sorry, I went through those laws. I'm happy to do that. 40-1310, Section 8, ACHD establishes the use standards of the public right-of-way. We have exclusive jurisdiction. We have a case law, both Boise City versus ACHD. We also have the Wiley decision that interprets this statute 676528 in terms of transportation systems and the responsibilities. While it creates an obligation for ITD to consult with the locals, they still have this the authority to decide what goes within the public right-of-way. I think the line, no matter how hard you want it to be different, the law is clear. The issue of the billboard on State Street, that was a relocation. It was already within the public right-of-way. We simply relocated it back into the public right-of-way. But that has nothing to do with this, because this statute deals with existing property owned and operated by the local highway jurisdiction.
So, Mr. President, I've got a question, because I'm not an attorney and I don't fully understand some of these issues or the fine points in the law. If that happened today, where we got a call from residents that were concerned about a billboard that went in violation of if that happened with this bill passed, if we got that same call and found the same issues, that it was constructed and put up in violation of our Land Use Planning Act and permitting process, does this bill, if it's passed, shield you from either the legal action that we're currently taking or our ability to engage on the permitting and placement of that? Because I've heard that this came about. I understand that John's heard it's about a salt shed. I've heard it's about a billboard. So I think we've all heard a whole bunch of different things and share a whole bunch of different concerns.
Yeah, Mr. President, Mayor McLean, this doesn't have anything to do, this law passes, it won't have anything to do with that billboard. But let me take you
What about others? My question, Mr. President, my question was about, if there was another one.
Well, ACHD has the ability, let me just take you to the statute right now. It's up. It talks about the powers and duties of highway district commissioners. They have the exclusive general supervision authority over all public highways, public streets, public rights-of-way under their jurisdiction, with the full power to establish design standards, establish use standards. That's not land use. The power of the jurisdiction highways shall be inclusive. They're the only ones that have jurisdiction within the right-of-way. They'll be liberally construed as a broad grant of power. So, I mean, you have to have some intellectual integrity that that's what the law is.
Are you saying I need to have intellectual integrity?
No, I'm saying philosophically, Yet when you read these statutes, you have to have some intellectual integrity about how to interpret them.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyon again. So if this isn't about the salt shed or about a billboard, what problem are you trying to solve? I just don't understand why this was even created or drafted. What's the problem statement?
Well, Mr. President, Commissioner Kenyon, I think there's been ample testimony today that the salt shed most certainly was the genesis behind this. But there have been other instances at the ACHD Adams Yard that this would facilitated a lot of cost savings and efficiencies in our operations. I want you to think that if we have to move this salt shed to a different location for winter maintenance, it completely changes, one, and it's going to cost somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000, one. And two, it's going to absolutely change our deployment strategy for winter response. So it isn't just like we can pick it up and move it. It has a huge impact on the highway district.
I don't want to get into the details here, but follow up. My understanding is this is a portable shed, and if you're trying to use it for sand, if there's a flood, it's in the floodplain, and it was only put there temporarily. Why wouldn't you want to permanently move that? And my understanding is to move one of those. ITV just did one recently, and it's around $20,000.
Mr. President, Commissioner Kenyon, again, I've already gone over the floodplain issue, and we'll most certainly, when we get to that issue, we'll have to deal with that. There's a lot of things that are being said about what the floodplain does and what it doesn't.
Mr. President, Goldthorpe?
Yes. Commissioner Beck?
Given the fact that there's so much opposition to this bill, the Ada County Commission opposes this bill. I think every city in the jurisdiction opposes this bill. Would you consider just withdrawing this bill and trying to work on a cooperative solution?
No.
Mr. President,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Hanson. I actually would support moving on a cooperative arrangement. I think from my personal standpoint, our priority as policymakers in this county under this unique jurisdictional issue we have of a countywide highway district, this issue doesn't exist in Canyon County or any others. I think it'd be very helpful. I think the issues that have been raised are really helpful. And they're complicated and they're not personal. I don't think anybody's being intellectually dishonest or misinterpreting. I think there are problems and conflicting issues in the code. I think this is a perfect opportunity, especially at our 50-year anniversary, to do a deep dive with our partners. I point out, as a former legislator, RSs were always considered personal until they were printed as bills. So it always was kind of confusing to me. Commissioner Beck can understand this too. How much do you talk about an RS until it gets printed as a bill? And many bills get printed for the very purpose of surfacing issues and then allowing conversations to take place over a year or two. Most bills that get printed don't pass. And I think this has raised the kind of issues that we should be discussing as jurisdictions within Ada County, sitting around the table. Who decides and when is the decision made about what is an essential facility? In Nampa, they decide what's an essential facility for their own road department and don't have to sue each other. And I think the one thing that taxpayers we represent get concerned about is when government sue government, because then they're on the hook for paying both sides. So I don't think there's an emergency. I think this is an opportunity. I really appreciate the input, and I think we're going to find some more. There really are some jurisdictional language issues in the code that Mr. Price has pointed out, and we're trying to navigate those. We try and navigate them in the context of specific issues, but I think we as policymakers need to recognize those conflicts exist in code and put personalities aside, and let's do a deep dive over the next year or two and address those. Thanks, Mr. Goldthorpe.
Thank you, Jim. I mean, just as a reminder, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, because you do a really great job of that. This was not noticed as an action item, nor are we entitled to take action like that, correct?
Mr. President, yes, that is true, but in fairness to Commissioner Hanson, the decision on legislation is with the commissioners, most certainly not with staff.
Yes.
But you would, there would need to be, if you decide to do something, further action, it would, you can't do it today.
Okay, thank you. Would you suggest then that anyone in opposition to this show up tomorrow when it's heard? In the Senate?
Mr. Chair, Mr. President.
Just a minute, I asked Steve a question. I don't think he...
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was directed to me. Mr. President, yes, there'll be a full opportunity tomorrow, most certainly anticipating that testimony. So, yes, that's the time to be heard. But the question of whether to go forward with the legislation, again, that's a different topic.
Thank you. Commissioner Kenyon?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure that you understand that the Idaho Planning Association opposes this. The Idaho Association of Counties, according to Lorna, opposes this. The Board of County Commissioners opposes this. The City of Boise opposes this. City of Meridian opposes this. I'm not sure if the Association of Cities, but John Evans said they do as well. So I'm just not sure why you would want to move forward with this if it's not an emergency without pulling it back to have meaningful and purposeful dialogue. I just don't understand what the purpose is to try to push this through tomorrow.
You know, I hate making this observation, but I really want to, so I will. Pulling it and having a year or two's worth of discussion on it only satisfies one person or one side. It doesn't take care of the problem. Thank you.
Mr. President, would you like me to go on to Senate Bill 1107?
I would, please.
Commissioner Goldthorpe, if I could just make one quick comment.
Mayor Simpson, sure.
On this, and I'm going to just agree with the rest of the cities and counties on this topic that I wish that we would, if we're talking about adding the word collaborate to this legislation, but we can't collaborate on the bill itself, I am very hesitant towards what ACHD will choose to do in our communities if the word collaboration does make it into law. So again, I would request, I understand you may not be able to take formal motion today, but you can go before the committee tomorrow and ask to have it postponed, and please work with us to help solve these issues. Hopefully you don't even need legislation to address whatever the underlying concern is to get this issue fixed. So thank you for allowing me to at least weigh in.
Thank you.
Mr. President, this is Matt Erpelding from the Boise Chamber.
Matt, have you been on the call since the beginning?
Not since the beginning. I was a little late, but I was with a legislator, so that's why.
We did indicate the conversations and your particular position, and we are really running long on time because there's another...
I need a clarification, and I'll be quick.
Okay.
This bill was printed with a certain language, and I just need to be sure that this is going at a minimum to the amending order in the Senate. And if that's the case, it could actually be placed on the commissioner's agenda to hold it in the House then. So there is a process here that would work if the commissioners voted that way. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
No, you're not, and that was actually already brought up.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Steve, with 1107.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, this is Lauren McLean again. I've got to jump shortly to another thing. I've been under the impression that this meeting was to, have a conversation. And we've read, I think all of us have read the bills, we've read the code, but have continued to share concerns. And I appreciate that you and the director pulled this together, but I want to make clear my frustration that This was designed not as a time for us to discuss whether or not this should move forward, but instead a time to review it as written, and then to be told that we should go talk to the legislature asking them to hold back. So we will, our team has worked on this, and we will officially request if needed, and I'm officially requesting now, that the commission hold this, given the great job it's done at unifying this valley around this legislation.
Thank you, Mayor McLean. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Next bill of concern is Senate Bill 1107. It relates to the single countywide highway district statute, specifically Idaho Code 40-1415-3. Here is the statute that's in question that's being proposed to amend. This too, there will be a request to send this to the amending order, as we've added new language in response to feedback we received from people who've contacted us, as well as legislators. Last year, under Idaho Code 50-2908, the legislature passed a new law that requires urban renewal agencies to enter into an agreement with a highway district in order to secure their increment funding out of property tax. That's on the books. It took effect on July 1. There is a conflicting provision, and I believe, we're trying to get rid of some of these ambiguities in the law, but this is incorporating that new law as it relates to ACH, the Single Countywide Highway District Statute. So what does it do? It incorporates the new law passed last year requiring an urban renewal agency to obtain an agreement with highway districts as required for property tax increment funding. We've already done one agreement with the CUNA Urban Renewal Agency. It went extremely well. The purpose of the agreement is to ensure that any funding from a highway district is expended on transportation projects. Senate Bill 1107 requires that any funding to an urban renewal agency from a single county-wide highway district must be provided pursuant to an interagency agreement. ACHD's funding in almost in every instance is limited to be expended on the construction, reconstruction, and maintenance of roads within our special purpose. So any funding that would go to an urban renewal agency by agreement would be limited to any proposed urban renewal transportation projects. That's the sole purpose, and that's what this legislation does.
Thank you, Steve.
Mr. President?
Yes, Commissioner Beck.
My name is Russell Westerberg. I'm on the conference.
Oh, Russell, you sound like Rod.
No, Rod's here too. But, Mr. President, two questions, and then I got I guess another question. You fine folks at Ada County Highway District, you're elected officials. The city council folks are all elected officials, and the folks that serve on CCDC are either elected officials or appointed by elected officials. This came as quite a surprise, and I'll get into that. My question is do you think it's probably time for these policy decisions that you folks show the courtesy of visiting with the other elected officials in the city and the county that may be affected by your policy decisions? And let me go just a step beyond that. I was in Senate local government when this was an RS. Didn't explain what it was, but I asked Mr. Price what was going on, and he implied, and I may have misunderstood him, but he implied to me that it was simply changing the way a countywide highway district was spelled, and it certainly does that, but as you have probably heard, it does a heck of a lot more than that, but particularly when you when you put the word "not" in, you relieve the highway district of any responsibility to sit down as you did last year with the city and the urban renewal district and work out a plan for the expenditure and the flow of increment increment revenues from an urban renewal area. So I'm looking now that there are some amendments proposed, and see, they might solve the problem. But I guess what I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, is that you folks that are in those elected positions make an outreach effort to communicate with the other elected officials in the county and the other taxing districts, so we're not battling over at the legislature with taxpayer monies on both sides of the question.
Thank you, Russ.
Mr. President, if I can respond. Mr. Westerberg, thank you for your comments, and I did inform you that this was simply incorporating the new law last year, that any funding from the highway district would need to be done by an agreement. And this provision conflicts with the new law last year. It clarifies, but it adopts the policy that was adopted last year, the public policy that any funding from a highway district that goes to an urban renewal agency would need to be secured by an agreement. And that is to ensure that any funding that goes to the urban renewal agency is spent on transportation projects. And there is a need for this. Obviously, we didn't have anything to do with that legislation last year. That was brought up by, I think, Senator Rice, and that law passed. So this need, we're simply adopting what was adopted last year, and it's simply extending that policy to any funding from the highway district.
But Steve, the word "not" was not in the legislation last year, and the way it exists without the amendments I think you're going to propose, it leaves the highway district in a position of compelling
Well,
an agreement to be reached with the city highway district.
Mr. Westerberg, this statute wasn't in question last year. It was Title 50, 2908. So yes, the word, this is the first time you're going to see "shall not" included. I agree with that.
Is there another question from anyone or a comment about this?
Mr. President, this is David Lehman. I represent the Meridian Development Corporation. I guess one very basic question is, it seems like in the legislation last year and then this legislation, the message that urban renewal districts are getting from ACHD is that we don't trust you guys with the increment that goes into our urban renewal projects. What this legislation has done, and as well as the legislation last year, is it's reversed the flow of that, right? It's saying that we didn't trust you, so now you guys have to, but you guys have to trust us now. So what would be the appetite of the commission to put, at the very least, if this is what the commission says it is, and it's just a follow-up to last year's legislation, what would be the harm in putting a process in statute by which urban renewal districts could interact with the highway district for such an agreement? Or if in fact the real issue that we're getting at is that the highway districts don't want their increment to go to fund parts of a project that are not transportation related, why don't we just say that in the statute? But what this does, it decouples the highway district and the urban renewal district from really having to interact with one another. The highway district may enter into an agreement, or it may not. It may talk to the urban renewal district, or it may not, because there's nothing that requires them to do so. So if the intent is to target the increment that comes from the tax or the highway district to transportation projects, why not just spell that out in statute, as opposed to creating a new situation where where urban renewal districts are having to come ask for agreements from the highway district. So I don't know if that's a question for Mr. Price or you, but it's certainly something I think. Yeah.
If that can be handled in the amending order, or would that be better, more expeditiously handled separately next year?
And Mr. President, and hi David, how are you? And thank you for your comments. Well, again, I think we were thinking this would be a simple change to incorporate the law last year. We've already have a process that's been set up for an agreement. We've already done one. We're on to number two. It's a very simple process. It's actually a phone call. They submit the plan to the highway district. We review, we identify the transportation projects. We look at how those projects integrate with projects we already got planned. In some ways, it opens up the door for additional funding from the highway district to support those projects. That is what happened within the CUNA case. We also, within those agreements, we agree that we will help we will coordinate in the design and construction of those projects. There's a lot more services that come with that. And I don't know how you write that into a statute, but I will tell you it's not in the statute now, and that's the process we follow, and it won't change.
Mr. President, Alexis.
Yes.
Mr. Price, if it's as simple as a phone call, then why does it need to be put in legislation?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pickering, fair question. The only reason is that there's a statute passed last year that creates a conflict with this provision. We're simply removing the ambiguity in the law.
But I feel like it makes it more complicated because we're not, just to echo some other comments, it makes it more complicated because we're still not describing what that collaboration or process actually looks like.
Fair comment.
Mr. President and Steve, unless I'm reading the underlined print in red, this actually puts a language into the statute that should have been there in the first place in your bill. Would you care to speak to that?
Mr. President, Mr. Westberg, what do you mean? I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
I'm looking at something that's on my screen. It's providing some amendments to 40-1415.
Yeah.
It's providing some new language to your bill. Would you explain those amendments?
You're talking about new language to the bill that's been printed.
Right. Yeah. It's
okay.
on the screen. It looks like you're going to amend the bill to where it actually might work.
Well, yeah. We received a comment from Senator Lakey, and he thought it would be more clarifying if we included that we would be responsible for funding the district's maintenance responsibilities required in subsection 1. He was afraid that this language would somehow impact that. We didn't feel that it did, but we made the change at his request.
Well, Mr. President, Steve, is it your intention to send this to the amending order then?
Yes.
Mr. President, this is Mayor Steer.
Yes, welcome.
Hey, thank you. If it's all right, I would like to have Lisa Holland chime in. She had a couple of concerns into the way it related with our agreement that we already had with ACHD on our urban renewal district. If you would allow me to have Lisa speak.
Always. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President and commissioners. Lisa Holland, for the record, I'm the Economic Development Director and Urban Renewal Agency Administrator for the City of CUNA. Looking through this legislation, we had a great relationship with ACHD. We're very proud that we were able to have you as part of our planning efforts for the brand new Urban Renewal District that CUNA formed this last year. I think that our agreement worked very well. Mr. Price and his team were great to work with. We created a wonderful agreement. And a big part of our plan are roadway projects for our district, including overpass that's much needed for our city, some street improvements. And so we did specify specifically in our agreement that any increment we gathered from ACHD would be used towards roadway projects. And I think that was a good model to use moving forward. The challenge we have with the language proposed here is that our agreement was between the Urban Renewal Agency and ACHD, not the city and ACHD. And the new legislation would put a little bit of ambiguity on that existing agreement we have in place with ACHD. So we have a challenge there. And it also says that the city would be responsible for the design and engineering of roadway projects and puts them involved in the Urban Renewal Agency process as well. So there's a little bit of ambiguity for us there as well. And we would love to have the opportunity to take this offline and work with you on figuring out what ways to make this legislation help you clean it up. But we feel that the existing legislation that came through last year, we worked well with ACHD to meet the standards that you all had, and we would hope that perhaps this legislation is not needed, but if it is, that maybe we could work with you to remove some of that ambiguity so it doesn't create conflicts with the existing agreement we already have in place with you all.
No, thank you. And Lisa, thank you for those comments. I don't think that this creates any ambiguities, as it really is the status quo right now. ACHD on any urban renewal project, we require an agreement before we do any funding. We've done numerous agreements with CCDC. It has nothing to do with the increment. Those are just general projects that we coordinate with a partner agency. And I can just say 8th Street right now. So as between the city and ACHD, I don't think that this impacts those responsibilities, nor does leave the city responsible for the design and construction of those. We're responsible for all the roads, existing roads, and this change about an agreement doesn't change any of those responsibilities. The only thing that it does is it makes sure that we have an agreement in place. And you can tell from the agreement that we've done that it's very thorough, that it creates a process. It works well on the development of projects within an urban renewal agency. The district actually bites off more than it needs to, but I think it's our commitment to make sure that one is that we coordinate projects within the urban renewal area, that we're involved in the development of those projects, and most certainly if there's an opportunity for additional funding from the district, that it would be proposed to the commission for consideration. That's the intent.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any other questions or comments?
Mr. President, I just, if we go back to 1106, when that's appropriate, I do have a couple of comments that I'd like to make.
Oh, okay. I thought we had finished up with 1106. But Steve, go ahead, Mary.
Okay. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming today. I think this is really illustrates collaborative effort, and that's certainly what the intention of having this meeting today, to hear everyone's concerns and issues that they may have with 1106. I did hear Mr. Price ask for any proposed language that was out there. It seems to me there is a lot of confusion about what exactly determines an essential facility. On one hand, we're using the reference of the salt facility over there on the Adams property to parking garages, and then I'm not sure Mayor McLean's question about the billboards was addressed. In my mind, that's not an essential facility. So I can see where the confusion with the essential facility. So I don't know if this ends up going to the amending order, if we need to expand on that definition of essential facilities. Mr. Neri had the suggestion about a date specific moving forward. So there are a lot of questions. I do want to just go on the record that I wish, and I think in a perfect world, we would have had these conversations prior to today. I think when we have a bill that's going forward like this, to get as much input as we can is always advantageous to hearing. This is the first we've heard about it. I know there has been some outreach, but clearly I feel like perhaps we've fallen short a little bit on that. At the end of the day, ACHD wants to be able to meet their statutory requirements, and we need to, I'm all for us working together, but we need to be able to do that, and I think this is the impetus behind this bill, so that we are able to do that going forward. Mr. Price, if I have captured that adequately, but we do want to be good partners. That's a two-way street, but we do need to have the dialogue about ACHD's requirement and the necessity for us to meet our statutory mandates, such as the salt shed, since that's been used as an example here today. But I do appreciate everybody's input today. I think there have been some good suggestions coming forward. But again, I just think conversations like this need to happen sooner rather than later. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary. Last call.
President Goldthorpe.
Megan?
Yes, thank you, President Goldthorpe, Commissioners, City Council, and Mayors. My name is Megan Conrad. I represent the Redevelopment Association of Idaho, which is a conglomeration, or its membership includes a number of urban renewal agencies throughout the state. I just wanted to echo some of the comments that were made on Senate 1107. Specifically, I am really, really concerned that while the intent may be good, this new language does create some, I think, unintended ambiguity in its application. And I have not had the opportunity to review or weigh in on any of the proposed amendments to Senate 1107, and so may need to reserve comment on that. But I do think that the change that was made last year addresses ACHD's increment and how that increment may be used and applied pursuant to an agreement that's reached between the parties. And certainly anytime there's work in the right-of-way between any of these entities, we will have to have a license agreement or cost-sharing agreement. I just am really fearful that this proposed language in 4014-15 just kind of opens a Pandora box of unintended consequences that we just have not had a chance to drill down on yet. So with that, I certainly would respectfully request your reconsideration on this proposed legislation. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Megan.
Mr. President, can I respond?
Sure.
Sure. Hi, Megan. How are you? Enjoy working with you. What I would be interested, Megan, if you can shoot me an email today that lets me know your concerns, the unintended consequences. Well, certainly our intention is not to do that. It's a very narrow motivation. So I'm most certainly receptive to any ideas that you may have or concerns. The other issue is this only applies to single countywide highway districts. It doesn't apply to all the other municipalities or urban renewal agencies throughout the state.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Thank you, Steve. Yes?
Just one last comment. So I've heard our leadership talk about how we want ACHD to be the city's, think of ACHD as the city's roads department, or streets department. And I just want to say that I don't think the process of which we've had these and currently having the conversation around these two bills is reflective of that mentality. And so, again, I'm hopeful that all of our cities and our land use partners can continue to reach out and all do the same and provide that feedback of how we can be better partners.
Thank you, Alexis.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I would echo Commissioner Pickering's comments. I did learn something much more in depth from David Lehman and from Lisa Holland about how this legislation may impact us. I think we did a really good job. We made the current code work for CUNA, and we're moving forward on another urban renewal district agreement. And so I think, just as my comments, personal comments, I think we would be much more successful working on this without the kind of the pressure of an immediate print and amendment deadline with our partners, because if there's resistance and these both go down to defeat, it's that much harder to start up the collaborative conversations that are necessary. So I would hope that we can just say, hey, let's look at these, and to the extent that we can all agree to co-sponsor it with our partners, we come forward as all the local governments out of Ada County saying, you know, there's complexities in the law, and we're going to make it work, and this is how we're going to make it work. And then we're all in there together. and saying this is how we're going to make it work best for the taxpayers. And so legislation coming forward would be, so I think we've learned a lot today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'll call an end to the comments and questions, and without further ado, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Downstairs, right? And I think all this is going on when I had no idea what was going on. Yes, I'm so sorry. Yeah. So
Ken.
I'm sure we're going to have WebEx down there.
Are the jury commissioners down there?
No, the public hearing room was cleared for the ACC.